Welcome to today's session. My name is Kim Snowball, and I will be your facilitator today. So let's get started. As we begin today, there are a few things that you need to be aware of. You will be asked to jot down a few passwords and phrases that you will need to access your certificate at the end. You need to put them in order so that you can pass the certificate challenge. There are handouts that you have a link to. Please print them out and make sure you have them in front of you because there are activities we will be doing together today. And so we'll be taking some pauses and some breaks just so that you can access that information. If you haven't done so, pause now, print them, and then restart. In the handouts, there are page numbers at the bottom. Those page numbers you will find located on the actual slides, highlighted in yellow, a yellow square in there that will help guide you to the correct page number as we go through our activities. And last and most importantly, welcome. Let's begin. Our goal today is that during this session, you will be able to increase your critical delivery skills by providing affirmative and corrective feedback during lessons with students, as well as when you're actually providing that feedback, that you're giving effective corrections and praise that will facilitate a growth mindset in students. So part of what we do as educators, whatever role we have within a classroom setting, we are monitoring all the time students' performance, which leads to how we respond to them, whether it's affirmative or corrective feedback. All of this is done by what we sometimes refer to as professional noticing. That means that we're looking for the small little nuances that tell us whether they really have it, they somewhat have it, they don't have it at all, and they need some additional guidance. So these are the things that we're going to be talking about today. So one of the tools that you can add to your toolbox today is this monitoring student response checklist. So as we start listening and observing students in more that professional noticing manner, we can ask ourselves the following questions that'll help guide us in our next steps. Are the responses simply correct or incorrect? If the response is incorrect, then where should I go in the form of corrective feedback? If the response is correct, maybe where should I go with the appropriate praise? And finally, what adaptations, if any, can I make to this current lesson so that students are moving forward? So on page 1, there is a little activity we're going to begin with. If the students do this, have this type of response, what should I be doing and how should I be listening or responding as an educator? So for the first one, I've already filled it in for you. If the students are giving a choral response, that means everyone is saying the response together. If I'm in a small group, what should I be doing as an educator? Well, I should be listening to all of them, but I need to be honing in on responses of students that struggling students. Now, I want you to take a few minutes to fill in the rest of them, and then we're going to go back and look at what the experts say, what we should be doing. So now that you've taken some time to actually jot down what you thought you should be doing during that time, and that's critical. We need to come to the table with me asking you, you internalizing the information, and then coming back with immediate feedback. So here we have what the experts say. When students are responding with a partner, your job is to circulate, look at the responses, listen to the responses, because that's going to help you later when we go through this feedback checklist of appropriate responses. Same thing with individual responses. You're listening carefully. Are the students responding correctly or incorrectly? And then what type of prompt was given, so that will actually even make a difference in how you respond. You're looking at response slates, response cards, or hand signals. We need to be looking at the slates, what actually is going on with their hand signals. Are they putting them up hesitantly, or are they actually very, very sure of their responses? So even how they interact with the time delay, that's an important piece. Written responses, we need to be making sure we can see all the responses circulating through the room, looking at them, giving them adequate wait time so they can actually write down the answers. And if we are giving something that's an internal question, meaning that they could write and write and write, that we give them adequate time to actually respond with a couple answers. And then finally, the same thing with the action responses. There needs some processing time. So depending on individual students, that's going to determine how long we give for response time. The biggest part that we need to make sure in this portion of today's session is that it is about circulating and monitoring. We need to be walking around, looking around, talking around. Dr. Anita Archer, who is the expert in explicit instruction, her and Dr. Hughes wrote the book Explicit Instruction. And they're always saying that we need to be praising, encouraging, correcting as we gather the data and monitor the students. So these are important pieces. They call it the PEC: praise, encourage, correct. And so we want to look and see what little nuances can we do to do it in a way that will affirm and grow a growth mindset. As we move into giving students feedback, we need to be asking ourselves, what is the ultimate goal of feedback? On page 2, on the top of page 2, there is a section, and it kind of has some guided notes. So think, then pause and write down what you think the ultimate goal of feedback is. Okay, here we go. The ultimate goal of feedback is to close the gap. And this gap we're talking about is between the current performance, where the students are, and the desired response, where we want them to be. That's why we give them feedback. That's an important piece. And if the feedback doesn't lead to that, then we're talking about feedback that really isn't as powerful as it possibly could be. How do we close the gap? Well, we need to be really honest. We need to be informing students. They need to know if my response is correct as a student or is it incorrect. If we have some understanding that might be flawed, or is it completely on target? And then what can be done to improve your students' performance? So it's naming and noticing using success criteria, the criteria that was set up to guide the students. One of the most recent articles that I think that is worth reading, because it has 5 really good bulleted lists of ways to use formative assessment strategies, especially in that distant learning outcomes with students that are struggling, students with disabilities. So I put that in there. You can actually just freeze the screen, look at that, Google it, and I will also add it to our list of resources that are in your participant handout. Time for the first password or code phrase. The first password or code phrase is feedback to close the gap. So go to page 1, write that down. Feedback to close the gap. That information is going to be needed when you use the certificate link to access your certificate today. We're going to move into an activity, figure 7.1. It's the different types of feedback. It is actually located in your handout on page 2. And what we want to do is we want to take some time, and I want you to be thinking about, if a student responds, we're listening, we're honing in on their responses. If the student responds in a certain way, what would be my next step? So this is that handout, or this is that guide that I was talking to you about that will help you in the future. And I would recommend that you actually keep it handy as you move forward. So go to page 2. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is actually take that handout and read and reflect on the different types of feedback. Somewhere on that actual page, go ahead and put a star on one or more that you need to work on yourself, thinking, wow, that's new to me. This would be good information. So I want to make sure that I include that and that I'm really focused on using this in the future when I interact with students. And then keep that close by because we're going to be using that same types of feedback handout for the next activity. So take some time, pause, read, and make your star selections. Okay, that was probably a lot of information, but it was really good information, very specific in what are the next steps. And so I hope that you take that, laminate it if you'd like, and keep that, share that with other educators to use. Now, on page 3, the next page of your handout, there is this application corrections checklist. And what we're doing is we're going to be seeing some scenarios here in a minute. We're going to read about some scenarios, or we're going to read some scenarios. And then we're going to ask ourselves, within that scenario, was the correction provided so that the teacher found that there was a flaw in the thinking? Was it provided? Was it immediate? Meaning, did they give it like right then and there, or was it something that they were going to discuss later with students? The type of correction given based on the scenario, that's where you're going to use this handout that we just actually read through to see, did they give the appropriate type of correction based on that response from the students? Was the response that was given, was it specific and informative to close that gap? Remember, that purpose is to close the gap between their current performance and the desired performance. That's the goal of feedback. And so we need to be thinking, let's meet that goal. On E, we need to be thinking through, are we focused on the correct versus the incorrect response? We need to be focused on the correct response. How can we get students to that point and not dwell on the incorrect response? F, deliver with appropriate tone. Sarcasm has no place in the educational world. It has no place with children. It always leaves a victim. And so we want to make sure that we use the appropriate tone with students. And G, end with students given the correct response. That is so important. And I highlighted the ending with the students giving the correct response. It's not what the teacher says. It's not what the educator says. It's not what the paraeducator says. It's not what the parent says. It's that the students actually give the correct response. And that's how you end a very positive interaction with students. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move to, number 2. The passcode for number 2 that you'll need to write down on page 1 is correction. End with students giving the correct response. Passcode 2, correction. End with students giving the correct response. Okay, so let's put this into practice with both an example and a non-example. You want to make sure you're on page 4 of your handout, and we're going to give you time to read through these non-examples as well as the examples, and then think through that checklist. Can you find evidence in the actual scenario? So as you see, this is a snippet of what you should be looking at on your handout. Item A, here's a non-example. So basically they're saying listed on the board are the numbers 4, 8, 19, 20, 21, 25, and 34. And then in the quotation marks is what the teacher is saying. And then it'll say she pauses, and then what everyone. So read through this, and then you will hear what in the italicized words, that's what the students are saying. Okay, so if you see an italicized, you're going to see that's the student's response. Your job then is to go through and put a check mark next to if you felt like Was the correction provided? You would put a check on A. Was it immediate? You'd put a check on B. And you'd go through and look through that handout on figure 7.1. It's actually, the page numbers coincide with the actual Dr. Anita Archer's book, because all of this activity is based on her work from Explicit Instruction, Effective and Efficient Teaching. Take some time. You're going to be doing both the example and non-example. You're going to read the item A, non-example first, mark on your checklist, and then repeat the item, the same type of checklist for your example. And then we're going to come back and review the answers. We're going to provide you with immediate corrections. So pause now. According to Dr. Archer, only A, B, and G should be checked. A, B, and G. A, it was provided. B, it was immediate. And G, it ended with the students giving the correct response, ascending. That's 3 out of 7 responses that were possible. When you look at example A, remember we had a non-example, now we have the example. The second one was the example. We're ending with the correct, and every one of them except for B was checked. And that is because she gave a little bit of time and she said, let's look at these numbers again. And then it didn't seem immediate. Okay. Well, we give corrections, we interact with students, but we also want to be thinking, how will we move students? Because after we give the correction, we want to actually say something positive, praise them for, their effort, praise them for, what they've just accomplished and all the work that they've done. And so there is a study that we want to just bring your attention to today because it is so powerful. And so we've got this little 4-minute snippet video. We're going to play it, and then we'll talk about how that works with the work that Dr. Archer is using in explicit instruction, and today, the power of praise and feedback.
So check this out. Carol Dweck and her colleagues wanted to look into the impacts that praise had on children's development. So what they did is they took over 400 fifth grade students from all across the nation, and they did a really simple yet interesting study. Here's how it went down. They gave all the kids a really easy nonverbal IQ test. There were 10 questions, and at the end of the test, they praised all the children in one of 2 ways. The first group was praised for their intelligence. So they said, wow, great job, you must be really smart at this. Now the second group was praised for their effort. So they said, wow, great job, you must have worked really hard at this. Now this is a really subtle difference, but the impact it had is incredible. So after praising the kids and getting them divided up into the 2 groups, they gave them all an option for their next test. The first option was, hey, this next test is going to be a little bit harder, but it's going to be a great opportunity to learn and grow. Now the second option was, this next test will be similar to the first and you will surely do well on it. Now the interesting thing is, out of the group that was praised for their intelligence, 67% of them chose the easier option, while 92% of the kids who were praised for their effort chose the harder test. This is unbelievable to think about, how just the subtle difference in the way that they were praised had such an impact. Carol Dweck explains why this happens.
The child or adult hears, oh, you think I'm brilliant and talented. That's why you admire me. That's why you value me. I better not do anything that will disprove this evaluation. As a result, they enter a fixed mindset, they play it safe in the future, and they limit the growth of their talents. Whereas focusing on the strategies they use, the way they're stretching themselves and taking on hard tasks, the intense practice they're doing, Those are the kinds of things that say to a child or an older athlete, it's about the process of growth. As a result, they don't feel, oh, if I make a mistake, you won't think I'm talented. They think, oh, if I don't take on hard things and stick to them, I'm not going to grow.
Next, Dweck and her colleagues gave all the kids a really difficult test. It was one that they would surely fail, but they wanted to look at how the different kids attacked this challenge. Dweck noticed that the group that was praised for effort worked harder, longer, and actually enjoyed this test more than the group that was praised for their intelligence. This group got really frustrated with this test and had the tendency to give up early. After this artificially induced failure round, all of the kids were given a third and final test. Now this test was the same level of difficulty as the first one, but check out the results. The group that was praised for their intelligence actually did worse on this test than the first one. Their average score actually dropped by 20%, while the group that was praised for their effort did significantly better, raising their average score by nearly 30%. This is a 50% difference in performance that was caused by a few subtle differences in the way that they were praised. This study shows how praise can either make or break a child's development. I mean, we all do it. We all want to be positive with the children we work with, so teachers, coaches, parents are always looking for ways to support their kids and tend to praise them quite a bit. So we need to look at research like this and realize, okay, praise is a good thing and there's nothing wrong with being positive, but we need to be very careful about praising someone's intelligence or abilities and focus more on the process and the effort that they put forth. I think this is a pretty easy fix that will help us develop growth mindsets within the kids that we work with. And as all the research shows, having a growth mindset has a big time impact on the development of a child, whether it's on the court, in the classroom, or just in life. Thanks so much for following along and watching this video.
So it's time now for our last and final password code phrase. Praise effort. In the video you just listened to, that has been very evident when you look at the results from students. We know that a growth mindset is a powerful piece in helping combat that learned helplessness, because we want students to honor and enjoy the actual process of learning instead of just get it done, move on. There needs to be a definite move toward helping students value what's going on as they're learning. So there is a checklist that you will find on page 5 of your handout. And this checklist will help guide you in how you can phrase your praise to students in a way that will actually build a growth mindset. We want to make sure that we include sometimes if-then statements. So that means if this, then that. So they see the direct connection between if I am studying, then I'm actually probably going to be receiving a really a higher grade than if I didn't study. That I'm being specific in my praise, so that we're not saying, well, that's just nice job. But I want to say something like, I like how you wrote the details in that paragraph or included supporting evidence. I really like how you showed your work, that you paid close attention. So being very specific on what you actually are liking. And you can actually look at that success criteria and use that as well to help guide, to pay special note to the next piece, which is provide noteworthy performance. So if they are building a project that you're looking at the performance criteria, what are they doing that is helping guide them from where they are to where they will, where we want them to be. Focus on the achievement of that process of moving forward and the effort, and that's why that's highlighted there, effort rather than any personal attributes like comparing your students to themselves versus others. Remember, it's about where the students currently are and closing that gap, not comparing them to someone else's performance. Positive, credible, and genuine. So keep praise positive, credible, and genuine. They know if you're just saying things offhandedly. And then unobtrusive. I never really thought about this until I saw it actually on her checklist. And I remember thinking, so if a student is really working hard, you want to make sure that you praise them at a specific time, meaning not when they're in the moment of working really hard, because then that will break their train of thought. And we need to make sure that they continue to work and then praise them when that you see a time is appropriate. We're going to use this checklist, and we're going to be taking some time to read through actually some additional scenarios. About 10 minutes of our time to pause the video. You're going to be looking through and reading through non-examples and examples on page 6 and page 7. If you work with elementary students, then you'll be focusing on page 6 only. If you work with middle and high, you'll only be looking at page 7. Okay? You're going to read on the left-hand side the non-example and then make the appropriate checks on the right-hand side. Cover up the comment. Don't read that until after you have finished your checks. And then we'll go back and revisit the correct answers according to Dr. Archer. So pause. Well, here we are at the end. When I look at the examples, and this is just the examples, that would be the second boxes under item A, item B, and item C, the second examples, you will have all of the A through G checked. When you go to the elementary non-example only for item A, only A and C are checked. When you are at the middle and you are at the middle and high school non-examples, your all will be checked for the middle and high school for item B, except for A. And both of them actually included non-examples that were identical, again, for item C. And area B only will be checked. As paying attention to the commentaries. I think the comments are really important. I provided on the screen the actual comments for item C, non-example. Remember that the major problem, praise is much too simple, too early, too overdone, and disruptive. This is what we were talking about in the checklist. Teachers also, although the teacher was giving specific praise, remember that they used the word so smart. The last two bullets really don't have anything to do with the actual checklist, but it really just is a commentary on the pace of the lesson, and that we need to make sure that we pick up the pace when we find ourselves dragging something out, and we need to keep to keeping the students engaged. As the session is now closing, we want to take time to actually go back and look at our goals. At the very beginning of today's session, we talked about that the participants will increase their critical delivery skills. So the time that you're interacting with students, those delivery skills, that we will be having more tools in our toolbox to provide affirmative and corrective feedbacks during a lesson, and that we also will provide effective corrections and praise. Those checklists that you have now at your disposal should be a helpful guide in all that you do when you move forward interacting with students, and that we hope that you take the time to share them with colleagues. So the last and final thing that we'll need to be doing is actually going back to and setting our intention. Take some time to flip over your participant packet, write an I intend to, that's your sentence starter for today, and then look back over at the information that you were provided from today's session and think, what will you do? How will you incorporate these particular tools into your practices as you move forward? That is an important piece of professional development, and we want that you to take the time to actually set that goal for yourself. Once you've done so, then move on to the next slide. How well you teach equals how well they learn. That is a motto by Dr. Anita Archer. I know we've referred to her a couple times throughout today's session, and I think it's a good way to reflect on what we contribute as educators to the learning environment of every student that we work with. The last and final piece of today's session is actually to apply for your certificate. You'll find that link located on the instruction resource guide that you received, not in the participant packet, but actually on the handout that walks you through where the links are. Go to that site, put in the required information, and don't forget, you have 3 code word, we call password code phrases that you will need to put in order. So it's a multiple choice, and you just need to choose the correct one in the correct order. And then provide us with some feedback about today's session. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You've been wonderful today, and I applaud all the hard work you've done to increase your own knowledge in the areas of feedback and praise. Have a wonderful day.